Well, we're here out on the range today to finally get a chance to shoot this ADG Brass with the 165 grain Sierra GameChanger bullets. Now this is an initial workup with half grain increments. I have a number of rounds to fire. Not really looking for any sort of precision out there. In fact, I'm only shooting one round at each powder charge, and I'm expecting those rounds to impact in different places. Most importantly for me though is the lab radar. It's going to be telling me the muzzle velocity of these things and kind of going to help me figure out how this powder and this bullet and this ADG brass is all working inside my Ruger precision rifle. So we're going to go ahead and get started, send a few rounds downrange. I'm going to be shooting at the same bullseye the whole time. I'm curious how the impact of these rounds is going to be affected by the expected change in velocity. .24-20. Now I'm using my bob-sled here, and I can see that the last round, by the way, flew pretty high. But I'm using the bob-sled, which really makes it easy to load single fire, a round at a time. Well, that's interesting. I shot lower. It didn't record that last round. Here we go. All right, let's try her again and hope it doesn't turn off. There we got it. Oh, could not track the projectile. There we go. All right, amazing. Well, oh, here we go, 26-35. Must have been the, boy, if it's the batteries, then it's really interesting because they weren't dead. They were at about half. So that thing really is touchy on batteries. Let's see if that one looks good though. The primer, yeah, we're still seeing a nice, rim around the edge of the primer. Not flattened out, not backed out. Excellent. 26-35 final velocity at this charge. Well, what can you say? You never stop learning when you're working on reloading or shooting or stuff like that. So things didn't go perfectly as planned. I did not anticipate that I'd have the problems with the lab radar. And I'm actually really surprised that even though that battery was indicating a half charge, it still was not able to pick up on those rounds. However, when I inserted a fresh set of batteries, everything worked just fine. It's also interesting, though, that even with a fresh set of batteries, the lab radar was only able to track the bullets out to 50 yards. That could be something particular about the ambient light conditions that morning. Was overcast. I don't know if that's going to make much of a difference since this really is not an optical system. But this is also a different bullet. This is the Sierra GameChanger, and it's possible that it just doesn't track very well at longer distances with the lab radar. And of course, the lab radar is the only chronograph that will do any tracking past the muzzle. So to help ensure that that doesn't happen again, number one, I'm always going to carry a spare set of AA batteries with me, but I also purchased one of these. It is a battery pack specific for the lab radar, and these are supposed to work quite a bit better than using AA batteries. I got this one from Creedmoor Sports. Shipping was very fast, price was reasonable, and so we'll give this a try the next time we go out to the range. Speaking of which, what are we going to be doing out at the range? Well, what we did so far is we shot 8 rounds from low powder charge. Remember, we're using Reloder-15. From a low powder charge all the way up to a higher powder charge at half-grain increments. Every one of those rounds fired perfectly fine, perfectly safely, and there wasn't any sign at all of any sort of pressure problems. So that's good. Remember, the ADG Brass, they recommended you be very careful. Start a new workup if you're going to be using an existing load or recipe, and work it up carefully because this tends to have a little bit different powder capacity in these cases. We didn't have any problems whatsoever, so once again, a nice thumbs up to ADG Brass. Now you might be thinking, well, was this just a wasted trip? I mean, I lost 5 of the 8 rounds that I was firing on this trip. And no, it's not a wasted trip. Yes, ideally I would have had velocity readings for each of those, but you'll also recall I placed our remote camera right out there at about 100 yards watching the target. And if I didn't have that, I probably would have stopped shooting, actually, until I really got this figured out. But with that camera watching every round as it impacted, I was able to reconstruct shot by shot how the bullets flew. And so here's our target. 8 rounds here. You might remember round 1 impacting high, which is also kind of interesting because I did fire a couple of foulers. And if you don't get the oils and solvent, whatever, out of the bore, that first shot does tend to fly high, so I probably should have shot a few more foulers. But anyway, what's really interesting was rounds 4 and 5. Even though they had a half-grain difference in powder charge, they impacted almost exactly in the same spot, perfectly straight up above the dead bullseye. I was holding right there. Those reticles were sitting right there for every single round that I fired. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to now utilize an optimal charge weight process, starting at 42.5 grains of powder. That's shot number 4. That was its powder charge. And I'm going to work it up 6 rounds up to 43.5 grains. Now that's only 1 grain of powder, but I'm going to be firing those 6 rounds at 0.2 grain increments. And this is optimal charge weight. If you're interested in lots of details about optimal charge weight and what we call seeking the sill, we have a video on that, explains that entire process, and I'll be sure to put the link in the description below. So once again, I'm going to be using ADG Brass. I'm going to load those with Reloder-15 at those powder charges that I just mentioned at 0.2 of a grain increments. And once I get that all done, we're going to head back out to the range. Today I'm working on optimal charge weight for these 165 grain Sierra GameChangers. And I'm using ADG Brass. This is round number 1. Once again, firing at the main or center bullseye out there. And here we go. We got 2497. round number 2. And I've fired 3 Fowlers, and I started with the dry bore. I see this first round has fired or shot or impacted a little high. $24.99. Now the whole idea of optimal charge weight is that at some point, or maybe through most of this string, we're going to see the velocities increasing, sometimes at a pretty good jump. But what we're looking for is 2 or maybe 3 of these rounds having, and these powder charges having effectively the exact same, or ideally, the exact same velocity. That then creates a sill, a flat spot in that string, and that is the optimal charge weight for this load. She jumped by about 13 feet per second that time. Round number 4. $25.61. Now the lab radar is doing well this time, and I really think the problem I had last time is that the batteries were not absolutely full. They were half full, and it just would not function. As you see, I bought that battery pack, got that through Creedmoor Sports, and it seems to be working really well. Well, that's the last round that I have for this OCW series. And I'm going to graph this data, study it a little bit more closely, but by recollection, I think the OCW sill is going to be rounds 1 and round 2. Very, very similar. Then we saw some pretty good jumps, 13 feet per second, so on and so forth, increases. It's not the fastest of velocity, and these Sierra bullets, they have a ballistic coefficient rating that varies based on the velocity. And there's truth to that, so it's a good thing. And their highest of velocities comes at about 2630, 2680, if I recall correctly, feet per second. So we're quite a ways away from that. But again, this Sierra GameChanger bullet is not designed for long-range, precision, competitive shooting. What it's designed for is hunting applications. And so we don't really need that high velocity to give us the highest ballistic coefficient. What we need to have is enough velocity so that terminal performance is good, and that bullet, number 1, imparts a lot of energy into the game animal. The bullet expands nicely and kills the animal cleanly. Now that went much better. All 6 rounds fired, of course, safely, and all 6 rounds were recorded by the lab radar. Good lesson learned there. You gotta be running fresh, full batteries to make that work quite well. But the important thing that we were trying to do was to seek the sill, find that place where 2 different powder charges effectively gave us the exact same muzzle velocities. And interestingly enough, rounds 1 and 2 firmly established the sill, giving us only 2 feet per second of difference, 2497 versus 2499. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to use 42.6 grains of RL-15 behind this 165 grain Sierra GameChanger bullet. And to make this really interesting, I'm going to also load some rounds with the 165 grain Barnes tipped triple shock bullets. And in our next trip out to the range, we're going to be running a pack test. That is precision, accuracy, and consistency, comparing the Sierra GameChanger versus the barn-tipped triple shock, both being 165 grain bullets, backed with the exact same powder charge, exact same ADG brass, and I think it's going to be a real fun test to run. So thanks for watching this episode of Extreme Reloading.